Hey, everyone. So to call the Book of Revelation controversial, and perhaps even hard to understand or confusing is tends to be a misnomer, or at least an understatement. Lots of people have, for centuries, had trouble understanding this book and trying to put everything. And really, it's kind of got vitriolic, right? I don't think Revelation is something we need to argue over. I think it's something we need to explain or study, understand, and we can definitely have differing opinions on it. I think we can. If it was meant to be clear, it would be clear. It's not. I mean, the seven thunders, literally, the God's like, don't write those down. So let's be honest. The Book of Revelation is intended to be, a little mysterious. So we should not ever be breaking fellowship over it. We shouldn't be. It shouldn't be as divisive as it is. Uh, the rapture is one of those conversations that, I mean, people will just get heated and they'll yell, and it's a terrible, terrible thing for the body of Christ. So let me begin with the Book of Revelation is intended to be difficult. That is, it's just what it's designed to be by God. We need to accept that. We need to accept that people have different readings, and that's fine. It's not a matter of salvation. None of these are necessarily key components. What we need to do is listen to other people's readings and understand them, and then weigh them against what we see, and either be persuaded for or against. Even if something sounds good, we should put everything through its paces and see if it works. Okay? That being said, I'm going to lay out an argument for what I believe is because there's so many things to discuss, the bare bones argument for at least the order in which certain events take place. And the reason I'm doing this, and this is sort of the first one of this series, is that I think this sort of makes the rest of it much easier to understand. And so what I want to do is create a timeline, and then I'm going to show you where certain things are occurring in those timelines, and that will help us sort of in a more broad sense, understand how to read it, because it really does change how you interpret a lot of these events. For example, the 144,000. If you think that they are called at the beginning of the 7-year period, and I have no problem calling the 7-year period the tribulation. I just don't think I think the way we understand it's very inaccurate, but that's a different video. I have no problem calling it the tribulation. So if you think they're called at the beginning of the tribulation because they occur in the sixth seal, which is at the beginning of the book, you're going to have a different interpretation of them than as someone who says, no, the sixth seal actually does not occur at the beginning of the 7-year period, it occurs at the end. So there are ways, so we need to really evaluate these things in a different perspective. So I'm going to lay out a timeline that we have from the book of Daniel and from certain key points from the book of Revelation and from Matthew 24. We're going to lay out a timeline. And then we're going to look at very key texts from the book of Revelation, and we're going to compare and contrast them. And we're going to be able to sort of see that there is a generalized, very easily understood timeline. Now, what I will say is the problem is we want a timeline to say it has to occur on this date, at this time, etc. Well, unfortunately, because the book is mysterious, while some of these things could be argued, I want to take the baseline sort of foundational, what can we know with with almost ontological certitude what is being said. I believe there's a cipher by which all this is decoded, and we can at least say these are the key events. These things either happen before or after or in between two things, right? So we're going to have a timeline. We're going to have the key events. And then we're going to put the seals, the bowls, and the trumpets. We're going to say this event lines up with this event here, or it can be from this point forward or this point backward, right? So the arrows will point either it goes to a specific point, or if it's going before or after an event. That's the best we can do. But I think that will allow us to unlock the entire book and read it in a more cohesive manner, and have an argument for why, an explanation for why we read a certain event a particular way, and it'll make a lot more sense. So I'm going to switch over to the actual text. I want to make sure you can actually read it, so I made it big, I made it colorful. The colors will sort of align with, obviously, with what we're trying to say, right? So it's like, if they're saying the same thing, then we're going to have them in similar colors, okay? And we're going to demark things that, you know what? I'll just put it up, and you can see it. So let me go ahead and make this full screen. Okay. So let's go ahead and, okay, good. You can see my scroll here. So this is Daniel's 70th week, right? This is, and I'll argue, yeah, great tribulation. I got no problem using that word. So the first thing that we are told is, this is sort of the beginning point, which is in Daniel 9:27. This is the confirmation of the covenant. In a later video, I will point out that I do not believe that the covenant is actually created by the Antichrist, but the covenant confirmation does occur. There it is, right here at the very beginning. This kicks off the 7 years. There is a 3.5 year period where, which ends with Daniel 9:27 and Matthew 24:17, and Revelation 12:7-12. What happens here? This is the abomination of desolation. Matthew Matthew references Daniel. This is the event. This is where the Antichrist stands in the Holy of Holies, claiming to be God. Revelation 12 also states that this is when Satan is cast from heaven, right? This is when he's thrown down to the earth, and then everything after that is the wrath of Satan. This is the reign of the Antichrist. This is important. The Antichrist isn't the Antichrist until this event here. This is when he becomes the Antichrist. This is when the man of sin is revealed. This period, this 3.5 years, these 42 months of his reign, is the wrath of Satan. Revelation 12:7-12. Satan and the devil has come down having great wrath. This is this period of time. It ends with the return of Christ and the establishment of the millennial kingdom at the end. This is the battle. So I would say this is the Battle of Armageddon and its resolution, of which establishes Jesus as the king of the earth, in establishing the final Davidic rule for the millennial kingdom. So this is our primary timeline. Now, the question we need to ask is, how do we determine where things fall on this timeline? Now, I would like to point out that everyone agrees that basically Revelation 12 until the seven bowls are filled with vignettes. They are not chronologically arranged, right? They are vignettes. Everything that occurs within the vignette is correct, and it occurs during that time frame, but it's a vignette and it's separate from the others. I would argue that is actually the entire format for the entire book of Revelation. I would argue that the bowls, that the trumpets, and that the seals are all within themselves vignettes. Now, yes, the first trumpet does not occur after the third trumpet or anything silly like that. It occurs in succession: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. But whether it's the seals, the trumpets, or the bowls, they are their own sort of larger, grander vignettes. And the reason that they're numbered in sequential order is that they are to allow us to determine where certain things are occurring in a broader sense of the timeline, and to allow us to sort of reconcile some things. So, how can I prove this, right? You might say, but okay, that's a great theory, that they're all vignettes that are bookended, right, between the first 4 chapters, which is Jesus talking to John, and then John the Revelator, and then writing, and then John's acting as a scribe to write letters to that's the bookend. That's the first one. The other end is them basically, it's Jesus talking to John again, saying, hey, this is how this is all going to wrap up. This is, and it's basically the letter to the church with the broader meaning of this is what's going to happen in the millennial kingdom, and then I'm coming. So that's the bookend. Everything inside is a vignette one way or the other. To prove it, we need only look to the seals and to the trumpets and to the bowls themselves, right? So all 3 of these are the ends. This is Revelation 8:5. This is Revelation 11:19. This is 16, 18, and then 20 through 21, meaning verses 20 through 21. So we're going to read all of these, and let's look at the colors, right? Now you'll notice that green is down here. Why does Ezekiel 38:39 in here? That's important. Ezekiel 38:39, as I'm going to show, is not what's often called the War of Gog and Magog, is not, let me phrase this, is not the Gog and Magog that we see at the end of Revelation. Rather, this is the Battle of Armageddon itself. The War of Gog, because this is the War of Gog of Magog. This is important. The king in Ezekiel 38:39 is Gog of Magog. He is the one that is of Magog. Whereas at the end, there's Gog and Magog. They're two separate entities, and they are coming to fight. So give me a second here, and let's read them over, and let's see how they all correlate. So at the end of the seals, it says, "Then the angel took the censer, filled it with fire from the altar, and hurled it to the earth." Ezekiel 30, again, this is chapters 38 and 39. This is just sort of the best stuff that really sort of cements it for me. I would recommend going back and reading all of 38 and 39, because you'll see it is very much the Battle of Armageddon. Fire from altar and hurled it to the earth. So there's fire and sulfur that's tied up. I will rain upon him and his hordes, many people. This is God about Gog and his armies. Hordes, many peoples who are with him with torrential rains and hailstones, but fire and sulfur connected right there. Then there came peals of thunder, rumblings, flashings of lightning, and an earthquake. This whole thing's about the powerful earthquake. The fish of the sea, and the birds of the heaven, the beasts of the field, all creeping things will creep on the earth, and the people who creep on the face of the earth shall quake at my presence, and all of the mountains shall be thrown down, and all the cliffs shall fall. Every wall shall tumble to the ground. This is not just a minor earthquake. This is a massive earthquake. What happens at the end of the trumpets? Then God's temple opened in heaven, or in heaven was opened, and within his temple was seen the ark of his covenant. And there came flashings of lightning, rumblings, peals of thunder, an earthquake, and a severe hailstorm. Flashes of lightning, rumblings, peals of thunder, rumblings, flashes of lightning. Same thing. There is an earthquake that is mentioned. Earthquake is mentioned here. Now it adds the hailstorm. You notice it's adding something. This is going to add something as well. But these are clearly the same event. Now let's jump over to 16 verses 18 and then verses 20 and 21. This is the end of the bowl judgments or the vial judgments, however you want to mention it. By the way, it's key to note, seals are never called judgments. Trumpets are never called judgments. Only these. These are the bowls of his wrath. And there were flashes of lightning, rumblings, peals of thunder, and a great earthquake, such as there had never been. Again, great earthquake, and a great earthquake, such as there had never been since man was on earth. So great was that earthquake, and every island fled away, and no mountains were to be found. What happens in Ezekiel 38? There is an earthquake, and all the mountains shall be thrown down, and the cliffs shall fall, and every wall shall tumble to the ground. This is the same earthquake. These are all mentioning the same earthquake. And this is an important point. This is the thing that allows us to absolutely connect Ezekiel 38 to Armageddon. And great hailstones, about 100 and about 150 pounds each, fell from heaven on people. I will rain upon him and his horns and many people who are with him, torrential rains and hailstones. Later, it does describe these hailstones in more detail. This is key. What we are seeing here is that the final events of the seals, the final event of the trumpets, and the final event of the bowls, or of the vials. I prefer vial, I really do. These are all the same event. And the same event is Ezekiel 38:39. This is the Battle of Armageddon. The war of Gog of Magog from Ezekiel 38:39 is the Battle of Armageddon. This is just this. It can't be clearer than this. But in order for this to be the case, what this means is all three of these events are the same event. That means it means the bowls, the seals, and the trumpets are all occurring essentially simultaneously, or at least overlapping. So maybe though you're saying, well, okay, these all look, sure, they're using the same words, they're describing the same event, but maybe they aren't really the same event. Maybe they just really look different. Maybe it's entirely possible that these three events are three separate events. They just happen to be all the same thing, but they're just not really the same thing. Okay, fair enough. But let's confirm that Ezekiel 38 and 39 is Armageddon. Let's do that first, because there's more detail on that. So as you can see, I've color-coded this as well, so we can compare and contrast. Ezekiel 38:17 says this: "Speak to the birds of every sort, to all the beasts of the field, assemble and come, gather from all to the sacrificial feast that I'm preparing for you, a great sacrificial feast." So so God is speaking to the birds and the beasts, well, through the prophet Ezekiel. Now there is a feast coming. It's a sacrificial feast. It's a great sacrificial feast. What is at this sacrificial feast? Right down here. The feast that I'm preparing for you, which is at God's table, right? It's filled with these things. It's telling you now this is telling you what it is, but this is the Lord. This is the key. This is why this is in green. This is the great sacrificial feast. God is the one who is preparing for this. It will be at his table, and God is the one who's declaring it. The Lord, Jehovah, or Yahovah, is the one who's declaring it. Revelation 19:17. "Then I saw an angel standing in the sun with a loud voice, and he called to all the birds that fly directly overhead, birds, come and gather for the great supper of God." This is of God. This is the great supper of God. God is the one preparing this. So, what's going to be consumed at this great supper, this great sacrificial feast? Well, the birds and the beasts are going to be eating the flesh, and you shall drink and eat flesh and blood. Flesh of the mighty, the blood of the princes of the earth, horses, charioteers, mighty men, and all kinds of warriors. That's what they're eating. They're eating the blood and the flesh, princes of the princes of the earth, the mighty men, horses and charioteers, all kinds of warriors. Revelation 19:17 and verse 18. What does verse 18 say? These birds are going to be eating. Eat the flesh of kings, the flesh of captains, the flesh of mighty men, the flesh of horses and their riders, and the flesh of all men, both free and slave, both small and great. Lastly, what is the promise of this? Not just he's going to have, in Ezekiel, it's not just that God's going to have a feast. It's God's sacrificial feast. And it's a feast of God prepared by God. What are these animals going to consume? Right here. What's the promise? You're going to eat fat until you are all filled and drink blood until you are drunk. This is not just there's going to be food. Like, these things are going to be, like, you're going to get drunk off of this blood. There's going to be so much food that you're going to get fat off of it. That's the promise. This is an all you can eat and drink buffet until you are done, until you're beyond done. So, what happens at the Battle of Armageddon, which we know it is the Battle of Armageddon? This is Revelation 19. Verse 21 says, "And the rest were slain by the sword that came from the mouth of him who was sitting on the horse." And so this is Jesus. "And all the birds were gorged with their flesh." Gorged. This is not, hey, they ate. This is, they are gorged. So, let me go back. Sorry, I hit the wrong button. Ezekiel 38 and 39 is the Battle of Armageddon. These events are all correlating with this event here. Ezekiel 38:39, we just proved, is the Battle of Armageddon. The Battle of Armageddon is described, or at least referenced. It's described very much in Ezekiel 38:39, but it's clearly referenced at the end of all of the seals, the trumpets, and the vials. This is important. So this is our key. Now, you may say, I'm not 100% convinced. Great. So let's look at Matthew 24:29 through 31, and compare it against Revelation 6:12 through 17. This is important. Revelation 6:12 through 17 is the sixth seal. This is the sixth seal. This is critical. Matthew 24 says, immediately after the tribulation of those days. Now, what is the tribulation of those days? Let's hop on down to the red text down here. This is what the tribulation of these days are, and it's Matthew 24:15 through 21. So when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel, we already said that the abomination of desolation happens 3.5 years into the final 7-year period. This is the revelation of the man of sin, right? This is it. This is the 3.5 year in mark. We've already put that on our thing. So everything in Matthew 24, 29, and 30 and 31 occurs after that event. And for there will be great tribulation. This is the such as not been before from the beginning and until now, and nor will ever be. So so after the tribulation of those days, what's the tribulation of those days? This event, the abomination of desolation. It's after the abomination of desolation we get the great tribulation. What do we call that? Let's go back to our very first thing. Abomination of desolation, midway through. There will be great tribulation. This is it. The wrath of Satan. Matthew 24 is lining up with because again we use Matthew 24 as our base, so it's no reason this shouldn't line up. But what this also means is everything that occurs in Matthew 29, 30, and 31 is occurring after the abomination of desolation. This is important. Now, you could also argue that it happens after this as well, right? This is we'll talk about this a little bit more in a second. But what we know for absolute certain is it's happening after this, the abomination of desolation. So the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, the stars will fall from heaven, and there will appear in heaven the sign of the Son of Man. And all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. 31 we'll talk about here in a second. But let's look at Matthew 24 and compare it with the sixth seal. This is the sixth seal in Revelation 6, 12 through 17. When he opened the sixth seal, see it's right there, I looked, and behold, there was a great earthquake. That sounds familiar. And the sun became black as sackcloth. The sun will be darkened. The full moon became like blood, and the moon will not give its light. And the stars of the sky fell to earth. The stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of heaven will be shaken. This is the same language in the same order. Then what happens? The sky vanished like a scroll that is being rolled up. Then will appear in heaven the sign of the Son of Man. Appear in heaven the sign of the Son of Man. Then what happens in Revelation in the sixth seal after the scroll, after the heavens are rolled back like a scroll? The kings of the earth and the great ones and the generals and the rich and the powerful and everyone slaved and freed hid themselves in caves and among the rocks of the mountains, calling on the mountains and rocks, fall on us and hide us from the face of him who is seated on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of their wrath has come, and who can stand? I'm sorry. What happens here? Then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on clouds of heaven with great power and glory. This is the same event. Matthew 24, which we know happens after the abomination of desolation, is the sixth seal. What does this mean? Now, as I pointed out, we could also argue that the tribulation of those days includes the stuff that happens in 21, meaning the wrath of Satan. For then there will be great tribulation, such as not been from the beginning. If we take Jesus' interpretation or words here to mean it happens after this, or not just this, but after this, then the sixth seal is essentially the very, very end of the timeline. Think about it. Matthew 24, 29 through 31 is Revelation 6. Exact same event. Now, I would like to point out there is one other thing. Just in case there's any doubt at all, that what I just showed you is true. Let's take a close look at Matthew 24, 29 through 31, but let's take a look at verse 31. Again, we talked about it in the last slide. We're going to talk about it here. So after, moon, sun's darkened, moon doesn't give us light, stars fall from heaven, everyone's freaking out because Jesus has appeared. What's happening? And he will send out his angels with a loud trumpet call, and they will gather his elect from the four winds, from one heaven to the other. Okay. This is the marking, or this is what happens. Again, this is still part of the sixth seal. It's very important to note. The sixth seal is a very long event. After the 144,000 are marked during the sixth seal. This also takes place in the sixth seal. After this I looked, and behold, a great multitude that no one could number, from every nation, from all the tribes and peoples and languages, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed in white robes, with palm branches in their hands. Then one of the elders addressed me, saying, "Who are these clothed in white robes, and from where have they come?" I said to him, "Sir, you know." And he said to me, "These are the ones coming out of the great tribulation. They have washed their robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb." Okay, so again, let's compare and contrast. Who are these people? These are the ones who came out of the great tribulation. Well, what great tribulation? This great tribulation, right here. But you're saying, but Jason, this is what you're talking about right here. This is 9. This is chapter 6 of, this is Revelation 7. This isn't Matthew 24. You're right. It's not Matthew 24, although this is clearly the same event. But let's point this out. After the coming out of the Great Tribulation, was there a Great Tribulation mentioned necessarily earlier? No, that word wasn't necessarily used. What is the Great Tribulation? It's this right here. John knows what he's talking about. John was here when Jesus was talking about this. John knew what was talking. So when the angel says Great Tribulation, John says, "Oh, you mean the thing that Jesus told me specifically about all the way back here in Matthew?" Yes, that's what he knows it to be. Remember, John, the Revelator, is John the Apostle. They're the same guy. He was there. Matthew recorded this event. Yes, Matthew is the one who wrote Matthew. I'm sorry. I know I'm going against a lot of scholars on this one, but there's other scholars who have confirmed my theory here. Matthew's the first book written. Matthew, the tax collector, actually did write the book. Just deal with it. John was there. Matthew recorded it. Wrong one. The angel is referencing it here. After the 144,000, that means if they are marked during the sixth seal, and the sixth seal and Matthew 24 are the same thing, as we have clearly seen, then this is evidence of my earlier theory that all 3 of these things, right, the seals, the trumpets, and the vials, are ending at the same time. Well, how is that? Well, because the entire thing, if Matthew 24 is the end of the story, and Revelation 6 is the end of the story, and the sixth seal is the end of the story, then clearly the 144,000 are marked at the beginning. But this does give us something that we can actually work with. This is the key to unlocking everything, is to understand that the bowls, the trumpets, and the vials are themselves vignettes. They're macro vignettes. We have macro and micro vignettes. Revelation 12, that's a micro vignette. Now, it does give us an entire timeline for the entire 7 years, yes, but it's an individual vignette. In between that and the bowls, these are all vignettes. That's the key to understanding the book of Revelation, and that gives us a way to put things in a rational answer, to give us a way to put things in order. So, what does the timeline look like now? Okay, so we have our original timeline, right? This is the beginning. This is the abomination of desolation. This is the end. Battle of Armageddon, whole 9 yards. So we know everything ends. 7th seal, 7th trumpet, 7 vials of God's wrath are all occurring here, right? This is where they all end, or at least the 7th of these are. We're going to come into the vials of God's wrath here in just a second. So, what does this tell us? Well, we know the 6th seal is at the very least, because it is Matthew 24. It is at the very, very least. It just happens after this event, right? You could argue that the 6th seal is everything from the abomination of desolation to the 7th seal, which is the Battle of Armageddon. You could make that argument. So, since this is sort of the lowest common denominator, that's how I have it displayed. But I will say this, I don't believe that. I think the 6th seal takes place at the very end. I think it's the events right here. I think it's at the very, very end. I think it's this whole thing. That means seals 1 through 5, all we can say definitively is that they occur prior to the abomination of desolation. That's all we can say. Here's the thing, these seals, and the same thing with these trumpets, right? I'll show that in here in just a second. But that means the seals, they don't even have to occur within the 7-year period. This is a key point. We don't know when these seals are open, or let me phrase this. We don't know what, because the seals are what? They're sealed prophecies. I would argue that these are the prophecies sealed by Daniel in his book. That's a different conversation. I may do a video on that itself. But the seals are what? They're sealed prophecies. This is kind of clear. So it's not when they are opened, it is what event are the seals describing? What are they prophesying of? They don't have to prophesy. These first 5 do not have to prophesy any event in this period. Now, could they? Absolutely. But all we know is that the 6th seal occurs at some point after the abomination of desolation. That's all we can say for certain of the seals. What of the trumpets? Well, again, if you read the 6th trumpet, the entirety of the 6th trumpet is the second woe. The second woe is literally the abomination of desolation through the 7th trumpet, which brings us literally to the end. How do we know this? Because the 6th seal, or I'm sorry, the 6th trumpet rather. In fact, I will flip over here just in case. I've already done a couple of videos on this, but since this one's meant to be sort of unto itself, I thought I would point it out. So what happens with the 6th trumpet, right? So the 6th trumpet blows, right? That's the angels from the Euphrates. They go. And again, this is the second woe. This is important. This is the second woe. We then have chapter 10 where John eats the mighty, or meets the mighty angel and eats the little book. And then what happens? He prophesies about the 2 witnesses. The witnesses are killed. They're resurrected, right? This is, and by the way, they're witnessing for 42 months. 42 months. This is the reign of the Antichrist. This is literally incurring towards this is all about the reign of the Antichrist. The 6th seal actually ends in chapter 11, verse 14, where it says, "The second woe is past. Behold, the third woe is coming quickly." So what is the end of the woe? It is the resurrection and ascension of the witnesses. All of that is the 6th seal, or the 6th trumpet. Sorry, there's seals and trumpets and vials everywhere. The 6th trumpet is literally the reign of the Antichrist. And it ends with the 7th trumpet, which is somewhere around here, which is basically right here. Now, so the 7th trumpet, so we have the 7th seal, 7th trumpet, that's occurring, right? Well, what is the 7th trumpet? I would argue the 7th trumpet is not just the resurrection of the dead. Again, we will do that in a different video. But it's also the 7 vials of God's wrath. Because, again, we're never told what the third woe is. It just says the third woe comes quickly. Well, what could possibly be the third woe? It's the 7 vials of God's wrath, which is what? The 7 vials of God's wrath, now, I would argue, take place over a very short period of time. My reading, and I will not die on this hill, but I think this is my reading. The Feast of Trumpets is the rapture resurrection. This is the same event. In the time period between the Feast of Trumpets and the Day of Atonement, this is when God's wrath is poured out in the vials. The Day of Atonement is the Battle of Armageddon. That's what this is. That's my opinion. I think, and then the tabernacles or Sukkot, that's the establishment of the millennial kingdom. Now, why would I put this right here? Simple. When Jesus first came, he performed, and all of the major events occurred on biblical feast days, right? He fulfilled all of the spring feasts up to and including Pentecost when the Holy Spirit descended. Every major event that is described and acted out through those feasts, through those Moedim, are seen in Jesus' life at the end. And he fulfills them one at a time in succession. He doesn't do one and then wait a few years and do another. He does them all at one time. The fall feasts, I would argue, are indicative of his return. This is his return, and this is what's going to happen. The Feast of Trumpets is the rapture resurrection. I think they're the same event. The Day of Atonement, that's the Battle of Armageddon. Why? What happens? On the Day of Atonement, there was a goat, right? They put the sins in the goat. The goat was cast out to the demon Azazel, or to the wilderness. It's the same thing, actually. What happens at the Battle of Armageddon? Satan is bound and thrown where? Into the abyss. They're connected. Okay, so just a quick divergence, just so we're all aware. Azazel was one of the 200 watchers. Azazel was the one who taught mankind warfare, and he was bound within the wilderness, and that is where the goat was sent to. Was sent to that demon who was bound within the earth. Again, he's below, but he's bound in the wilderness. He's one very specific spot. In the same way, Satan is bound, right? So the sins are put on him. He's bound, and he's cast into the abyss for 1,000 years. This is the same event. That's what it was leading to. Tabernacles or Sukkot is meant to remember the time when they were in the wilderness, when God was with them. What happens in the millennial kingdom? Jesus sets up his kingdom where he lives with mankind for 1,000 years. The key to understanding the book of Revelation is that, and that's the end of it. Let me hit the right button here. And, well, now it's not letting me hop over. There we are. Being weird. Okay, we're back. So what's the key to understanding this? Understanding that everything are vignettes. This is not one story that has, well, this happened, the seals are first, and then we have the trumpets, and then we have the vials, and they're all one contiguous story going from beginning, middle, and end. That is not what's happening. It's not at all what's happening. These are also within themselves vignettes. We have to put them in their appropriate place by lining up their events with the timeline that we are given. That's all we have to do. And it's clear that that's what we're doing. So, I was thinking this would be a 15-minute video. It's turned into a 36-minute video because there's a lot to talk about. I apologize. But what is our takeaway? Again, there's a lot of things that are encapsulated in this I will have to make other videos on. The point of this is to say, if you want to understand and make rational sense of the book of Revelation, you have to throw out the old idea that it is done sequentially. Like God sat John in a chair and it's like, watch this movie of how the end of the world works, and John's just writing it down, and it's all one contiguous beginning and end story. It's not. These are vignettes, right? All of them are vignettes. So we don't have to put one necessarily after the other. Now, we do need to make certain that we are saying, yes, the first trumpet is followed by the second, by the third, by the fourth, by the fifth, etc. That's why that exists. But we're not putting them, well, first these, then these, then these. Nope. These are all stacked on top of each other. They are describing different time periods. The thing I showed you, that final timeline I showed you, is simply the simplest version, right? That's just that's, like I said, you can argue that the sixth seal happens at the end. All I'm saying is the only thing we say for absolute certain is after that event. So I hope this will make sense to you. I hope that you will realize that the book of Revelation was designed to be understood, just understood very differently. The problem is we've been trying to impose our idea on how it should be written onto it. And when we do that, we miss the thing entirely. It's very clear. The author went out of his way to make sure we were to connect the end event, the seventh trumpet, seventh seal, seventh vial. All of these things are connected in the Battle of Armageddon. That's Ezekiel 38:39. They are all telling us different things. Sixth trumpet, the entirety of the sixth trumpet is the reign of the Antichrist. It tells us these things. So I'm hoping that when you go back to read the book of Revelation, now that you kind of have an idea on where things should go, it should be a little bit more clear. Now, that doesn't mean that it answers all of our questions. There's tons of questions left to explore, and we will. But this hopefully creates a framework that will make it a little bit more understandable. I hope you found this at least interesting, and that I'm not saying that you have to believe it. I'm just saying it's something to try. Go through the book yourself, test it, see if it works. If it works for you, then I'm glad. If it doesn't, okay, wonderful. We're still kosher. We're still cool. This shouldn't be something that we separate over. This shouldn't be something that we find. This should not cause division. Division should be resolved, or not resolved. Should be left to things that are of true value, or true importance, like the divinity of Christ. Right? Those are key issues. This isn't. All I'm trying to do is provide a framework by which we can that will help explore and perhaps make sense of something that has bewildered a lot of people, myself included, for a very, very long time. I look forward to seeing you again, and I hope this is useful. Bye.